The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It is Sunday, the 11th of January, 2026. Welcome to This Week with Mary Holland, CEO of Children's Health Defense, and myself, Tommey. The first article here is from CIDRAP. CMS to stop requiring states to report childhood vaccination levels. States will no longer be required to report how many children they vaccinate to the Centers of Medicaid and Medicare Services. Then The Hill says Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and CDC in seismic shift, reduced number of recommended vaccines for children. Federal health officials announced an unprecedented shift in the childhood vaccine schedule, reducing the number of shots the CDC recommends for children. Then, of course, Brenda Belletti in The Defender. This is the article of this subject that we want you to read. HHS makes sweeping changes to childhood vaccine schedule. The changes create a new framework that keeps all currently recommended vaccines available and fully covered, while moving several vaccines into a category designed to emphasize shared decision-making between families and children. The new recommendations reduce the number of vaccines recommended as routine for all children ages 11 to 17. And then Brenda Belletti in The Defender, the CDC's new vaccine recommendations, what to know. Changes to the CDC childhood vaccine schedule bring the US childhood immunization schedule in line with those of other similar countries, according to federal health officials. What do the changes really mean for parents? The recommendations won't change for the MMR, polio, pertussis, tetanus, diphtheria, influenza type B, which is Hib, pneumococcal disease and chickenpox. The CDC also will continue to recommend the HPV vaccine, but only one dose, not two. So there's a lot there, Mary.
A lot there, Polly.
I know people are disappointed about the HPV, and because they know, here's the thing, Mary, they know from Vax2 that Bobby spoke out about how dangerous the HPV Gardasil shot is, as did you. And so I think people are a little confused of why the MMR, the DPT, why these things are still there. So let's clear this up.
Yeah, let's explain. So first of all, as I think, I forget who we quote here, but these are seismic shifts. This is The Hill. These are seismic shifts in vaccines, right? Since the 1960s, there's only been one direction in the vaccine schedule, and there have been these perverse incentives that you focused on, Polly, financial incentives for doctors to put their metrics above the individual child. These things are starting to be changed. There's a directional shift now for the first time in over 60 years, right? Now, I think we all believe, who are dedicated to CHD, there should be no medical mandates. Everything should be based on the individual. Nothing should be based on the public or the population per se when it comes to something that's injected in your body. Clean water, yes. Clean air, yes. Something inside your body, no. That has to be individually decided. And we're happy with this idea of more vaccines subject to shared decision making. The reality, to my eye, Polly, is that they've rolled back, Bobby and team inside the government have rolled back as much as they can. Politics is the art of the possible. This is politics. We have to recognize this is really hard-fought politics. And HPV is a very dangerous vaccine, and Bobby Kennedy absolutely knows that. It's the last vaccine before they started the real rollback, right? So they've rolled back the Hep A, they've rolled back the meningococcal, the COVID, the Hep A. These are more recent vaccines, rotavirus. HPV got sort of put into play more than 10 years ago. There's a lawsuit brought by Rick Jaffe, one of the attorneys we work with closely, on behalf of Stand for Health Freedom and Dr. Paul Thomas, that's called Thomas versus Menares, or now the acting director of the CDC. And that is that the whole schedule, the whole childhood vaccine schedule, should be subject to shared clinical decision making, because they have never done the vaccinated, unvaccinated studies that the Institute of Medicine, now the National Academy of Medicine, has been telling them for over 15 years they have to do. And one of the things I'm most excited about these changes, reducing the burden from 17 to 11 federally recommended vaccines, reducing what would be the aluminum burden in those shots by about 25 to 30%, which is really important. But one of the most important things that's not getting a lot of attention is that the CDC and Kennedy has said, we're going to move forward with real science. We still don't have gold standard science justifying these 11 vaccines on the schedule. And they're committed to doing placebo-controlled trials, Polly. That is where the rubber is going to meet the road. And one of the interesting things in the article, the second article by Brenda Belletti here about what you need to know, James Lyons Weiler, a scientist friend to the movement, has said, you know, what may be happening here is a natural experiment between the blue states and the red states. If indeed the blue states stick with the old CDC pharma cartel schedule, as they say they will, California, New York, Oregon, et cetera, those kids are going to be hyper-vaccinated, and the red state kids are not going to be hyper-vaccinated, and you're going to start to see much better health metrics in the states that vaccinate less. So I hope that's not what's going to happen. I hope the whole country will follow the CDC schedule, but as we'll see with some of the litigation, that may or may not be the case.
And just also to remind people that the Hep B at birth is not recommended. I spoke to a pregnant mother the other day who said she's not afraid now. She has to have a hospital birth. She is not afraid to now to go in because of that. So she's very grateful. So there are, I know it's not enough. I know that the parents.
Polly, I'm sure, candidly, you know, it's not enough for any of us. It's probably not enough for the people who are leading the charge in the CDC and HHS. But what they know is that we have to have really solid science to back up even more significant changes. And they don't have all that science. They have some good stuff. The Vax Unvax book, Let the Science Speak by Bobby Kennedy and Brian Hooker is a great start. But they don't have everything they need. But I do know that they're working really hard, as they've just told us, to get us more hard information. In the meanwhile, they're doing so many things to encourage more individualized decision-making, better transparency, more informed consent. So we, as the health freedom movement, absolutely have to be grateful for these unprecedented changes. Are they enough? No, they're not enough, but they are so much more than we could have expected under any other individual Secretary of Health and Human Services or under any other administration.
Absolutely. Well, Rick Jaffe here in The Defender. HHS just gave parents more say in their kids' vaccines, and the vaccine establishment is running scared. So I like this article. So again, it goes on about how they moved 6 vaccines from the university recommended category into a category designed to emphasize shared decision-making between families and clinicians. The move doesn't affect insurance coverage and won't likely affect vaccination rates, but the vaccine establishment sees the move as a threat because parents might start asking questions, and the vaccine mafia doesn't tolerate questions. Correct.
Correct. It's a really good piece. I was very happy that we've run it. It kind of goes through the fact that in most developed countries, and this is sort of the study that CDC did based on the presidential memorandum from President Trump in early December, to look at other developed countries. And most other developed countries, Polly, even including the UK, actually just use recommendations. They don't use coercive mandates. No other developed country says your kid can't go to school if you don't take these vaccines. That is, and it's only 5 states in the United States, but that's such an outlier. That is such an outlier. But Rick points out that 20 of 30 European Union countries legally don't have mandates. In Germany, there's 1 required shot, measles. That's it. He even points out that in Russia and China, there's more freedom not to vaccinate your children than the United States. So I think he's right that what's really at issue here is the narrative that vaccines are safe and effective, that vaccines save lives, that everybody should get the same thing. And that is starting to crumble, and that's going to crumble some more. But he believes, as in most of these other countries that rely on recommendations, like Japan, that the uptake actually is likely to stay high. I'm not sure I agree with that once the truth comes out, but it's a very good editorial piece, and it's definitely worth reading.
Yeah. Also, remember the parents that don't know better, the parents that I used to be, they listen to their pediatrician. So whatever their pediatrician recommends, whether it's AAP schedule or we'll talk about that more, we've got more of that to come. Well, Senator Bill Cassidy is losing his mind. Cassidy rips Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s vaccine schedule change, says it's based on no scientific input. Senator Bill Cassidy said the move will make America sicker.
Well, unfortunately, I think everything he says is true of the previous vaccine schedule, that it does make children demonstrably, provably sicker, and it was not based on science. There's not a single vaccine on the childhood schedule that has been truly placebo-controlled. Unfortunately, he keeps showing himself to be a pharma representative, not a people's representative.
In the Defender, federal judge clears path for AAP to sue Robert F. Kennedy Jr. over vaccine policy changes. A federal judge ruled that the coalition of major medical organizations, including AAP, can proceed with a lawsuit against U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Children's Health Defense General Counsel Kim Mack-Rosenberg said the ruling fails to account for the medical group's conflict of interest, as always.
Well, this is going to be very interesting, Polly. So I actually think, let the fireworks begin. This case now on behalf of the American Academy of Pediatrics, but other ones too, in this 42-page complaint is the American Public Health Association, the Infectious Disease Society of America, a physician mom who says she has barriers to access to getting vaccines. I'm excited that their case is moving forward. They'll probably amend it to challenge what Bobby Kennedy has just done as secretary. But specifically, this complaint is about his getting rid of all the people on the advisory committee for immunization practices. He dismissed 17 people and brought in a much more diverse group of people. And they're claiming that that violates the Federal Advisory Committee Act that requires that there be a fairly balanced panel and that they operate in an open and independent manner. And they're saying that Bobby Kennedy was doing this based on his own personal kind of predilections. Again, what's going to happen, Polly? I mean, they're wasting HHS's time from my perspective, but what's going to come out likely is the lack of science, the fact that everybody on that ACIP committee previously was compromised. Every single one of them either owned pharma stock or they were working on pharma contracts. All of that is going to come out for the American people. So I say, bring it on. And interesting, the article points out that the lead lawyer on behalf of the American Academy and the others was the vice president at Moderna from 2020 to 2022, pushing Spikevax. And before that, he worked for Merck. I mean, these people are bringing to the American public of their own volition the fact that they are totally captured by pharma, which makes Bobby Kennedy's point. This was not science. This was captured a regulatory agency. So I'm excited, actually. I say bring it on. No problem.
Thank you to Tia for sending this in to us. So the Georgia Department of Public Health. So you're going to see it on your screen now. If you click on the child and adolescent schedule, it says learn more. You click on learn more and it takes you to the AAP recommended schedule, not the CDC recommended schedule. Now, I understand from people at Children's Health Defense, they're not the only people that are refusing to comply with CDC recommended schedule.
Yeah, so Georgia has not declared that they're not going to comply. And in fact, if you go to the school page for Georgia, it does take you to the CDC schedule. In the past, remember that the CDC schedule matched precisely the American Academy of Pediatrics schedule. So I think there is going to be a period of time in a lot of places where there's a little bit of confusion because this is a big change, right? And changing the web pages takes a few days, et cetera. But it's the blue states, if you will, California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, Maine. Those are the states that are refusing to go along with the CDC schedule. And we're going to see more litigation for sure.
Well, now we get to my favorite, most exciting article of 2026. Michael Nevadakis in the Defender. Doctors will no longer receive financial rewards for vaccinating kids. In a December the 30th, 2025 memo to state officials, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services said it does not tie payment to performance on immunization quality measures in Medicaid and CHIP at the federal level. U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said the new policy protects medical freedom and informed consent. The federal government will stop paying physicians based on the number of patients they vaccinate. Oh, Mary.
So I know this is exciting. It's not quite as great as we might imagine, but the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services covers 40% of children who get support through Medicaid or the Childhood Health Program, CHIP. And so for 40% of kids, we're now going to see the beginning of the end of these value-based contracts. So this was a regular, this was a ruling or whatever. This was a directive passed put out at the end of December. So it should really start to turn around these perverse incentives, Polly, that put these metrics for pediatricians above the individual child. And that together with this now moving things to shared clinical decision-making really is going to start to shift dynamics. And as Rick Jaffe's article points out, it's going to allow parents to ask a lot more questions. It's going to basically make the pediatricians not be allowed to kick kids out of their practice. And it's going to allow for families to get a lot less vaccine. So we're starting to see some really significant changes.
Yeah, it's fantastic. ABC News here. Children who miss early vaccines are more likely to not get the MMR shot by age 2, a new study finds. The CDC data showed that the MMR vaccine declined over the last several years, but the authors say that factors linked to delayed or missed vaccination since the COVID-19 pandemic have not been well studied. Parents who miss early vaccines, I don't think they're missing them. I think they intentionally know what they're doing when they're not taking their child to a pediatrician. That's what I think.
I think you're right.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. flips the food pyramid. U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. unveiled new dietary guidelines for Americans. The new U.S. food pyramid puts protein, dairy, healthy fats, vegetables, and fruit at the top, with grains at the bottom. This is huge news. Sally Fallon and all these people have been telling us for so long that we're eating cereal and bread and all that kind of stuff, which we all love, I know, but that's not good for us compared to eating healthy fats. And I'm so excited about this.
Oh, Polly, it's huge. This is also just a huge change this week. I mean, really, kudos to Secretary Kennedy. So these guidelines will be in effect through 2030, right? So this is 5 years, and this is going to apply to children who are getting federal food assistance, the military, veterans, elderly people on Medicaid, women and infants and children, WIC, and Head Start. So this is going to have a big cultural impact. This is a lot of people in the United States. And as Kennedy said, he said, food policy promoted and subsidized highly processed foods and refined carbohydrates and turned a blind eye to the disastrous consequences. Today, the lies stop. So it's huge. I mean, this really should change people's perception of food and get us moving away from so much highly processed starch and grain that unfortunately has been treated with glyphosate. We're going to start seeing healthier people, right? Fewer vaccinations, healthier food. We're going to start seeing changes, I believe, within the next short period of time.
So I know that people don't think Bobby's done enough, all that kind of, but he really has done the most incredible.
Oh my gosh, Polly, people have to understand that politics is so complicated. It is the art of the possible. If Bobby could do more, he would do more. He is doing everything he can without losing his job. That's the reality of what's happening. I should also say that what he basically did, people are saying, and I love this, is like he flipped the food pyramid. He just turned it upside down. And it turns out, according to data from October 2025, half of Americans' calories were coming from ultra-processed foods. I mean, that's scary, actually. Those are basically like food-like substances. They basically were malnourished in this country. It's ridiculous.
And it all ties back to Big Pharma in a way, because then they can sell drugs to make you,
Absolutely. Big ag, big pharma, big pesticide. It's very clear they all work together.
Suzanne Burdick in The Defender, new peer-reviewed report exposes flaws in Danish study claiming aluminium or aluminum in vaccines is safe. The report by a dozen leading scientists and thought leaders in aluminum toxicology and vaccine injuries concluded that the Danish study failed to establish the safety of aluminum in vaccines. The authors of the new report called for independent, rigorous, and honest science on the health impacts of aluminum in vaccines. Yes, please.
This is a great piece that was published just at the end of December in a peer-reviewed journal, Journal of Trace Elements in Medicine and Biology, by the leading scholars from our standpoint, Polly, on aluminum. So Chris Exley, Dr. Shaw, Tom Lenovich, and our own Brian Hooker and Carl Yablanowski. And they basically say that article was garbage that came out in July. Secretary Kennedy himself wrote a piece in Trial Site News back over the summer, challenging the assumptions of those articles from July, saying that aluminum is good for you. I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, aluminum is not good for you. Aluminum is a toxic metal that is neurotoxic, and there's no question about this. And in fact, if we can lower aluminum, which is in the DPT, Hep A, Hep B, Haemophilus B, HPV vaccines, pneumococcal vaccines, we are definitely going to be improving childhood neurological health. So it's a really important article. Kudos to the authors. And, you know, of course, the mainstream media that touted this fraudulent piece in July have not touched this article. This is just the propaganda that the mainstream media does when it comes to vaccines, because they're paid by pharma.
Right, but we're going to go to the UK now. And so not only is the UK introducing the MMRV on their schedule, so as America is reducing its schedule, England are ramping it up. We do have Dr. Andy Wakefield on tomorrow morning to talk about the dangers of the MMRV and what's going on in England. But on top of that, so let's read the Telegraph first. Children to be vaccinated in home visits, families who have missed out on jabs to be targeted with doorstep National Health Service appointments in 12 pilot schemes. And the Sky News says children from struggling families to be vaccinated at home as immunisation rates drop. Not a single childhood vaccine in England in 2024 met the 95% target needed to ensure diseases cannot spread among youngsters. Health visitors, and they call them specialist public health nurses, will administer the jabs during routine health visits. The 2 million scheme aims to improve immunisation rates. The government is also announcing that from January the 2nd, all children will be vaccinated against chickenpox for the first time. So really, one of the main reasons to talk about this is, first of all, we don't like the word struggling or poor families. I mean, what does that mean? Where are you going? And secondly, if it's happening there, you know, in the wrong hands, it could happen here or anywhere else in the world. We do not want people coming to our door, particularly health visitors, Mary, jabbing your children. They come in to see if your children's developing normally at 18 months or whatever it is. And we don't want them jabbing our kids in our sitting rooms or our kitchens.
Yeah, I don't think, Polly, that they're going to I don't think the express purpose is to vaccinate kids without parental knowledge or consent, but it's inherently coercive, right? A nurse shows up at your door wearing a white coat saying, oh my God, your child could die if you don't get this vaccine. And that is what it's going to look like, right? They're going to say, oh my God, your kid is 18 months old and they haven't had their XYZ. Hand them over right now so that we can take care of this so your kid doesn't die tomorrow, which is completely absurd. But I pray, Polly, that as more and more people kind of wake up, you know, people will slam the door in their face, say, thanks so much, not interested, go away. And there's no penalty for that. So that's what we need to think about with our friends in the UK, of like a slam the door campaign.
Right. Andy Wakefield on tomorrow morning to talk more about that. Brenda Belletti in the Defender Bayer lawsuit claims Pfizer and Moderna used Monsanto's GMO technology to build COVID vaccines. Bayer filed a federal lawsuit accusing Pfizer, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson of unlawfully using mRNA optimization technology originally developed by Monsanto to genetically engineer crops as the platform for their COVID-19 vaccines. Oh gosh, gets worse and worse, this whole COVID-19 vaccine situation.
Yeah, so I love the quote here from McCullough Foundation's Nick Hulsher, who said, welcome to clown world. I just love that. And I told Lou beforehand I wore this shirt because it kind of reminds me of Harlequin clowns. You know, the idea that Bayer is suing Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J to get in on the profits from the COVID shots, which in our view were death and debilitating shots, is horrifying. But the reality, as we'll talk about in the next article, Polly, is that Bayer is in trouble, right? They bought Monsanto. They spent $63 billion. And then they've been hit with hundreds of thousands of lawsuits about people who were severely harmed by buy glyphosate, buy their Roundup product. And so they're trying now to go to the Supreme Court to get some liability protection similar to what the pharmaceutical industry has had for vaccines. We've got to stop that. We had a victory we'll talk about earlier this week, but it's still an ongoing threat. And this seems to be a way for them to try to hedge their bets. Oh, let's just see if we can garner a couple $2 billion from the COVID recipients who basically got that money from taxpayers. So the whole thing is scandalous, Polly, but we definitely have to cover it.
We do. Well, staying with Bayer, Brenda Belletti and the defender here. Bayer loses round one in fight for legal immunity, but more battles lie ahead. A controversial provision intended to block lawsuits against pesticide makers was cut from a government funding bill set to be voted on in the next few weeks. However, consumer advocates warn that Bayer and other chemical giants could still win the battle if the US Supreme Court rules in their favor.
So, Polly, we don't know what happened, but the Supreme Court on Friday conferenced this case called Monsanto versus Journell. And this is a case that would de facto create a kind of liability shield for pesticide manufacturers for current pesticides and future pesticides that would be very similar to what pharma has enjoyed of like, you get injured, tough luck, there's nothing you can do. It doesn't even set up an injury compensation program. So the article quotes really some of our fierce advocates in this area, Elizabeth Kucinich and Honeycutt. It's going to be interesting for us to follow this. They don't have a slam dunk here at all, Polly. So one of the important things that's happened recently is that an article that was published in the year 2000, it turns out based on litigation that in fact Robert Kennedy was involved in 2017, litigation against Monsanto showed that that article published in 2000, which was a landmark article about the safety of glyphosate, no big surprise, it was ghost written and paid for by Monsanto. And so that article has just been retracted by the Journal of Regulatory Toxicology and Pharmacology. And that's been reported by major media. And the reason it was retracted was because of, quote, serious ethical concerns on independence and accountability of the authors. And they were basically saying, and the EPA has said, glyphosate is not likely a carcinogen. Well, the World Health Organization's cancer project called IARC has said it's a probable carcinogen. And so this is really fraught, frankly, because the U.S. Department of Justice has asked the Supreme Court to take this case and to decide in Monsanto's favor. And the scientific evidence that's available shows that the EPA and the Department of Justice are simply wrong, and that glyphosate is a carcinogen and is related to hormonal cancers and to breast cancer and so on. So we will know next week. Next week, we should be reporting on this, Polly, whether or not the Supreme Court took this case. And then we'll see what will happen next. But this is critical because we know all the damage that's happened with this liability shield for pharma. We can't let this happen for the pesticide industry.
No, absolutely. All right, Michael Novodakis, tip of a very damaging iceberg. COVID vaccines linked to several cancer types in new review. A systematic review of 69 studies identified safety signals for leukemia, breast and lung cancer. The paper identified mechanisms, including the spike protein and DNA contamination found in some COVID-19 vaccine types that might be responsible for triggering cancer. Well, we've seen so much turbo cancer.
This is, though, very strong scientific evidence, Polly. This is a meta-analysis of 69 studies, some of them involving millions of people, from data from 2020 to 2025 showing increased rates of lymphoma and leukemia. And Karl Jablanowski, CHD's senior scientist, said, this is not remotely surprising, right? You give an experimental product to everybody in the world with a technology that's never been used widely before. I mean, it's just so horrifying. It's horrifying.
Okay, well, Brenda Belletti in the Defender here. Autism is not a genetic disorder. A new peer-reviewed study shows a new paper based on a review of 519 studies challenges the belief that autism is a neurological condition stemming from a genetic brain disorder. Instead of trying to locate autism in the genes or inside the brain, the authors, who include Children's Health Defense scientists, suggest examining the entire constellation of immune, neurological, and gastrointestinal, metabolic, and environmental influences that shape human development. And we've had Brian Hooker, our Chief Scientific Officer on CHD-TV, to explain this. But it is actually fantastic news for a great many parents out there who've always believed what happened to their child was fine, had a vaccine, not fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Polly, anecdotally, we've known for a long time that there's no autism gene and that the $1 billion spent on that research was totally down the drain. And it's great to have peer-reviewed, published literature now saying that's ridiculous. It's multifactorial. We have to look holistically, a whole body approach, and we have to seek full recovery for people who have autism and protect future generations. So kudos to Brian Hooker and the whole team that worked on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, Aaron Lewis here in The Defender, defending the defenders, the facade of religious exemptions in the US military, the right to freely exercise religion, central to American identity, is routinely constrained in the military. How can we ask men and women to sacrifice for our rights while denying them theirs? It's a great article.
It's a great article, Polly, and we're doing a film about what happened to the military during COVID, where obviously the religious exemption process was a complete sham and they were acting illegally. And as Lewis points out, the Constitution is there shall be no law, right? Abridging free exercise of religion. Like, we should even get out of the idea that there's any exemptions, right? You have a right to profess your conscience so long as it doesn't harm anybody else. And as we now know, Pfizer didn't even test for transmissibility. So there was no reason for people, as it turns out, and arguably they didn't know it, but there was no reason for people to be forced to take these shots. And we absolutely, as the military, lost really valuable people and punished people completely without reason. So it's a very important, well-written piece about the centrality to American society of religious rights.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're more to come on the military film that Children's Health Defense is making.
And I should say, we also have this pending lawsuit, Polly, that Aaron Lewis references here, a case, Children's Health Defense versus HHS, and that is basically a case against the U.S. military, or the Department of War now, saying you have to have real procedures for religious exemptions that you don't, clearly, from COVID, and you have to clarify what are the requirements for people entering the military. As the lawsuit points out, and this article points out, it's very murky. What are the requirements for people coming into the military? We want excellent candidates, whether they're vaccinated or not. And so I do think that, as we know, Polly, the military has been so hyper-vaccinated, and it's really time for a real review, because the health of people in the military is central to their ability to defend the nation.
Let's talk about LED lights. LED lights harm vision and cognitive function. Kids are especially at risk. A child's eye lens is clearer than an adult's. This allows more potentially harmful blue wavelength light to reach the retina, says Mark Baker, founder and president of the Soft Lights Foundation, the non-profit. So last month, they petitioned the FDA to study the health effects of LED lights, which emit blue light, and report its findings to Congress. I'm so pleased to see that, because I don't know about you, Mary, but I can't deal with those LED lights.
I so agree with you, Polly. As a driver, some of these LED lights absolutely are blinding. They're very dangerous, but we know that blue light is more cognitively disruptive and hormonally disruptive than red light. And that it's particularly harmful to children. So I'm happy that we're looking at this, and I'm grateful to the Soft Lights Foundation for filing a petition against the FDA about this.
Defender here. Children's Health Defense urges FCC to drop plan that would strip communities of local control over cell towers. A proposed rule change by the FCC that would allow for the uncontrolled proliferation of new cell towers and other wireless infrastructures exceeds the agency's legal authority, according to comments filed with the FCC by Children's Health Defense. Children's Health Defense said the FCC should abandon the effort and instead comply with a 2021 court mandate to revisit its safety limits, which haven't been updated since 1996. By the way, our EMR department is doing really amazing work.
Well, this is a result of their remarkable work, Polly. So the federal law, Section 704 of the Telecommunications Act from 1996, basically disallows local communities to argue that there are health problems with the antennas or with the towers. And so they could not get towers rejected on that basis. However, the law today did not disallow them from getting a tower or an antenna removed based on the fact that it would lower property values, which it will. It would harm vulnerable species, endangered species, and that it would disrupt the visual sort of make up the landscape of the area. And so CHD, through its advocacy efforts and its legal efforts through the Electromagnetic Radiation Department, has been very successful in several places around the country in getting Verizon and other cell tower companies not to be able to put their towers in residential areas. So that's happened in a lot of communities. So obviously the telecommunications industry is like, okay, we've got to stop these folks from doing what they're doing because they're getting in the way. And as Scott McCullough and Miriam Eckenfels, who are the leaders in our electromagnetic radiation program, state in this article, in 2021, Children's Health Defense, together with Environmental Health Trust, won a lawsuit in the federal circuit, the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, saying, you, FCC, Federal Communications Commission, you must update your health and environmental guidelines for the public around stationing these antennas and towers, and for all of the devices, the cell phones, the tablets, the laptops. And Polly, since 2021, it's now 2026, they have done nothing. And so, as Scott McCullough, the lead attorney for our work in EMR, said here, the FCC must tend to the 2021 decision about health and environmental effects. And this is a misguided distraction. And I completely agree. We don't really want to have to litigate against the FCC to do what the Court of Appeals already ordered them to do. We, of course, will if we have to. But what we've done is to file notices with the FCC against this rulemaking that they're proposing. And people have until January 15th to submit comments. So please, if you care about this, submit a comment. We're putting it up on the screen right now. You can make a difference to make the FCC walk this back and do what they're supposed to do, which is come up with realistic health and environmental regulations.
And to our viewers listening to today's show, I mean, you look at the work Children's Health Defense is doing in our science department, in our legal, in our EMR, in our press. I mean, the Defender every single day coming out. I mean, this is phenomenal work and funded by you, the people. So thank you, and do help us to keep going on this amazing work that we're doing in 2026, because this is the front line. We're on the front line, and you're all here with us.
Yes, thank you all so much. And it's going to be an amazing year. I have zero doubt in my mind that the Kennedy administration at HHS is going to push forward. And in fact, they've said that they're going to be working not only on vaccines, not only on food, but they are going to be working on electromagnetic radiation. They are going to be working on other environmental toxic exposures like nanoplastics, like chemicals in our water and in our air. And we are going to be a huge, we're going to continue to be part of this effort and to support what we like and to be open where we think things don't go far enough. And we definitely need your support to continue to do what we do. And we're so grateful for all the support we have.
Really grateful. All right, that's it for Mary and I for this week. I'll be with you tomorrow with Dr. Andy Wakefield. Lots of good shows coming up this week. So pray big, stand firm, never settle. Mary and I'll see you next week.
Solar radiation management, SRM. So this is a story in Politico, and it's talking about a company called Stardust Solutions based in Switzerland. And they are basically working with millions of dollars at their disposal on completely blocking out the sun. They're very secretive about the chemicals they're using. They're talking about a very fast timeline for development. And the conclusion of this article says at some point safeguards will fail and we'll have only bad choices. Blocking out the sun may be the best choice. Give us your thoughts on that.
Stardust Solutions, Rainmaker, the Scopex plan that was pushed in media and the make sunsets to IT clowns from Silicon Valley, this is all smoke and mirrors, all of it, everything, including the Stardust bit. Let's all pretend that this hasn't been going on in our skies at an unimaginable scale. This is a climate engineering Manhattan project, and all these little media tidbits that they throw out there are simply smoke and mirrors to make people think that we might have to do this someday, while it's been raging in our skies for 8 decades.
If climate engineering were deployed, it would look exactly like what we're seeing in our skies, but then again, they tell us that we're not really seeing what we are actually seeing. The paradox is, the more the climate engineers spray the planet, destroy the ozone layer, disrupt the hydrological cycle, and increase the overall warming of the planet, the more they feel they have to ramp these programs up to try to mitigate some of the damage that these programs have done in the first place. That is the true definition of insanity.
As a society, we are like a freight train heading for a broken bridge that is just a few years away from us. And I think people don't understand the exponential increase of toxicity in the environment.
These operations should be considered the most insane endeavor ever deployed by the human race. These operations are systematically derailing all of Earth's life support systems in the attempt to blot out the sun. The myopic, short-term objective of trying to cool the planet while worsening the overall warming. The climate engineers, if these operations are allowed to continue, are pounding the nails into our collective coffins.
From a scientific perspective, and what we know about nanomaterials and their effect on human health and the environment, this is a serious problem. And it really does warrant further scientific investigation.
We need the answers to get to the bottom of this national security problem.
So again, crops are collapsing, fisheries collapsing, insects collapsing, wildlife populations collapsing. From your perspective, how could this paradigm possibly be maintained for much longer without a functional planet?
Well, clearly it's not sustainable, Dane. I think what is difficult, as you're pointing out, is that those facts are not readily available to people. They're not really reported on a regular basis. I think there's a debate about, is there such a thing as chemtrails or geoengineering? Is there such a thing as climate change? But nobody's talking, as you are, about the collapse of the insects, collapse of the plankton, collapse of the soil quality. Those are not really in circulation. And I think that you're bringing this out. I think that it would be useful to maybe track some of these things that you do reference a lot, but on the collapse of actually the biosphere that we're in. But as you've always said, I think if people become radically aware of how bad the situation is, and in particular the geoengineering is causing it, and it's being funded by governments around the world, permitted by governments, all on a deceptive basis. People don't know about it. People haven't authorized it. I think there is an opportunity there to change it.
All right, we are live. Tell everyone your name, please.
Mandy Purcell.
And this is about your husband.
Yes.
And what year did this happen?
He passed away January 21st, 2022.
Did he take the COVID shot?
No.
Why did he not?
We were not comfortable taking the shot because we had researched it before, and we knew that it was gene editing therapy, not a vaccine, and it was new to people, just a trial, and we didn't want to be a guinea pig in a drug trial.
So what made your husband become sick enough for you to take him to hospital, which I presume what happened?
It started out with me, I got sick first, then we just found out that it was COVID, and so our whole family was ill, and I went to the hospital first. And when I made it through, I got out. And when I came home, he told me that he wasn't feeling very good. And I told him to go ahead and call the advice nurse with Kaiser, which he did. assuming that he was going to do the same thing as me, go in, get diagnosed, get medication, and be discharged. But it didn't go that way for him. So he was advised by Kaiser to go to the emergency room because his oxygen sats were like 83.
So he had a pulse.
Yes, we had a pulse oximeter at home.
Okay, so that's important. So you saw that they were below 80. Did you say 85?
Yeah, I think I was 83 and I think he was 85. And say I was worse than he was, but he's the one that they took out, and I'm still living.
So you both went into hospital?
Yes.
Tell me what happened. And they knew you were both unvaccinated?
Oh yes. When I went in, I had been sick for over 2.5 weeks and was not getting any better. So that's when I finally contacted the advice nurse, and they recommended I go to the ER based on my oxygen sats. So when I went in, the triage nurse immediately started grilling me on the vaccine and being very hateful and ugly.
Can you tell me some of the things she said?
It was a he. Basically asked me my status. I said I was not. He goes, you understand that the unvaccinated are coming in here and they're dying, and you should have been vaccinated. And I was running high fever. I was very sick, and but I stood my ground with him, and I told him that I am not taking experimental drugs, and that was his choice to do it, and then report to me in a year or so and let me know how he's doing. And he didn't take that too well. So I got moved on, and then I got diagnosed with COVID pneumonia, and I was admitted in the ER. They had recommended remdesivir as one of the treatments, and I had read about remdesivir. I knew that it was not good. I had heard what it had done to people. Unfortunately, I didn't know then what I know now. So I told him no remdesivir. So, oh, that's not a problem. I get in my room. I make sure the nurse looks at the computer. I said, I want you to make sure there's no orders for remdesivir in that computer. He goes, oh no, we have to ask you before we give you anything. I said, okay, fine. So the next day the doctor comes in. By that time my fever had broke. I think it just was the timing. They didn't do anything for it, but the fever broke and the chills and some of the other symptoms. But the doctor came in making rounds the next day, and he asked me about the vaccine status. He says, I see you haven't had the vaccine. And basically it was the same conversation with him. And I educate myself, and I don't think he liked talking to me because I had knowledge. And so he said, well, I'm not going to argue with you. And I said, well, I'm not arguing with you. You asked me and I'm answering your question. And basically I told him the same thing I did everyone else. If you want to participate in a drug trial, you go right ahead. I choose not to. So he told, and then his statement, this is a key statement when it comes to my husband. He told me, he goes, I see you refused remdesivir. And I said, yes, I did. Everything I've read about that in the drug trials, I said, I want no part of that. When it kills 54% of the people, I'm not interested in that medication. And he says, I wouldn't recommend remdesivir for you because you're already 2.5 weeks into the illness. And he says, I feel like we can go ahead and discharge you with oxygen and your medication. You can do at home what we're doing for you here. And I said, discharge me. I want to go home. So I was discharged. I walked in, and my husband tells me that it's because he got sick a few days behind me. So it was starting to really hit him. And I'm thinking that we'd get the same result. So he calls the advice nurse. He's told the same thing. He goes in. He gets grilled at the ER. So basically, I'll back up a minute. My husband always kissed me goodbye when he left. He didn't care who was there, who saw. He always kissed me goodbye and told me he loved me. So I'm sitting on the couch on oxygen, and he comes in and says the advice nurse said for him to go ahead and go to the ER. He kisses me goodbye. He walks out the door like he always did, and he'd always came back in the past. So we're thinking it's the same, he'll get the same treatment. He did not. He got grilled in the ER. He refused remdesivir in the ER, and he ended up getting admitted. I am fuzzy because of my being so sick, and he kind of, I know now why, went dark on me. He had his phone, but he was being heavily sedated. And so he went in on New Year's Day. Yeah, he went in New Year's Day. And so it would be a Saturday he got in his room. So on Sunday, he calls me at like 10 o'clock at night, and I could barely understand him. And he tells me, they told me I need to call home and get my things in order, that I'm not going to live through the night. I'm like, no, you're not dying. I go, what are you talking about? That, you know, he wasn't as sick as what I was. And so I said, get the nurse on the phone. So the nurse is like, well, I tried to put the fear into him because he needs to lay prone to open up his lungs with the pneumonia. And this is the difference between him going to the ICU and going home. And so at this point in time, I didn't have any reason to think they were harming him. I wasn't aware until after all this happened what was going on in the hospitals. So I told him, I said, well, you tell Kenny to do what, you know, you guys ask him to do, to lay prone, if that's going to help him. So he made it through the night. They continued sedating him during the week. I didn't know until after a couple of days that Kenny had consented to remdesivir. I don't know what they said to him. I just think that he was so sick and just wanted to get out of there, and he consented. It was after he passed away that I looked at the medical records that I realized the first dose of remdesivir was the night he called me to tell me they said that he wasn't going to live through the night. It hit him that hard, but I didn't know until after the fact. He was given 5 doses while he was on the COVID floor. One of the doctors that took over his care get an update call with me, and she told me, she goes, well, I see Kenny has been given remdesivir, and she goes, I would never have recommended it, but she goes, I'm going to go ahead and give him his 5th dose. And I was under the impression, and she felt, that he would come home that weekend, that he was showing some improvement. Well, that wasn't to be the case. Then on that Saturday, I get the call from one of his doctors stating that he needs to go to the ICU, that he needs more care, that his oxygen needs were increasing. So we thought stupidly that maybe this was kind of a blessing in disguise. He would, you know, there would be fewer patients for the nurses to tend to. So he goes to the ICU on a Saturday. So then on Sunday, I get the call. The doctor tells me that Kenny needs to go on a vent. And I said, so now you're giving my husband a death sentence? And he says, no. I said, well, everything I've read, this has not turned out well for people. And he goes, no, you need to stay off the internet. Don't be looking at the internet. He goes, we're having really good, you know, we're getting good results. People are coming out of the hospital. And he goes, but besides, it's not really your choice because Kenny is lucid and it's ultimately his decision. And I said, well, you're right on that. So we were allowed to go to the ICU to be with him and my 2 sons. And so we spent 2.5 hours with him before he was intubated, and he had consented to it. And it was a helpless feeling for all of us because we didn't know what to do. At the time, I didn't understand everything that was going on and what they were doing to him. And, you know, I just felt like, if you can't trust your doctor, who can you trust? You know, at that time, that's what I thought. You know, they're supposed to heal you and help you, not kill you and make you more sick. And so anyways, we left and they intubated him. And he lasted a little over 2 weeks in the ICU. Progressively, I was allowed to go see him every day. And so he just went downhill. I could see when I went in, he was starting to go into organ failure. Ultimately, we ended up having to make the decision for him to get dialysis because his kidneys were failing. And that was hard. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let him drown in his fluid, so I consented to that. Prior to that, they had brought up ECMO, which I thought was a little bit cruel or unprofessional on the part of the doctor because Kenny, he said he wasn't a candidate and there wasn't a bed available. So I felt like, why are you torturing me with this if it's not even a possibility? And I said, well, if he could be a candidate, what are his odds? And he says, probably 8% survival rate. I'm like, okay, that's not real good. I go, what are his odds where he's at right now on the vent? And he goes, probably 12%. I said, well, I'll take the 12%. So, anyways, we got through that. They did the dialysis. They warned me that it would be really hard on his heart, but that they would stop it. And it was. but he did make it through the dialysis. So I went to see him on a Friday, January 21st, and everything seemed to be, fine. I mean, there was no change at that point, although during his stay he'd spiked fevers and infections caused from everything that they had been doing to him. So they were just compounding the illness that he had. So I left that day and I came home, and I got a phone call from the doctor, and he told me, he goes, after you left, Kenny got really sick. He goes, can you get back down to the hospital? And I said, yeah, I can get there. I go, my son can take me. So I'm under the impression, that I'm going to be going to see my husband die. So we get to the hospital, and I get in there, and it's all happening so fast. I get up to the room, and is a sliding glass door but their curtains were pulled. And so my son and I are putting on all the PPE that's required to go into the room to visit him. And like I said, it's all going really fast, and I'm noticing the vent outside his room is black. I'm like, why is the vent black? And then it's all kind of hitting me. The curtains are pulled. So we get adorned with all of that, and I walk in the room, and there's my husband laying there dead. And they never told me that he died. They let me walk into a room without any heads up, without any sort of consultation. They just let me walk in and find him laying there dead. My oldest son, who's extremely close to his father, was there when he got intubated, and he had said, he goes, I don't want to see Dad in this condition. Dad's coming home. And he says, when he gets home, that's how I want to see him. I don't want to come in here and see him laying in this condition. My son had, a few years prior to that, had experienced a best friend committing suicide. He hung himself, and my son had to take him off of the noose and notify his family. So this was traumatizing for him. So I respected how he was dealing with it. So he walks in with me to find his dad laying there dead. So I'm seeing Kenny like this, and Zachary, who worshiped his father, he's 31, collapsing and like, oh, Dad. And I know guilt washed over him, which he shouldn't felt that way because he didn't see him before. And so I open up the door, and I didn't walk out because then I'd have to put all that back on. So I opened up the door and I yelled at the nurses out there. They're standing there. I go, why would you not tell me? Why would you not warn me that he had died? Why would you let me walk in and find this? And they didn't say anything. Well, then the doctor that was on call with him that period of time, he comes around, and my younger son had arrived by that time, and he apologizes profusely. He goes, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean for you to walk in on that. He goes, I was going to meet you here. I got called away to a patient. And, maybe that was a case, but anyways, I was able to stay with Kenny. When I got there, he was still warm. So I climbed in bed with him, and I held on to my husband for the very last time, and I stayed with him until his body got cold. And then I kissed him goodbye for the last time before I left. And I buried my husband the day after our anniversary. My birthday is February 1st, and our anniversary is February 3rd. And every year we always go away and have some fun romantic trip. And I kept telling him in the ICU, Kenny, you got to get through this. You're going to get through this. We got a trip. Anniversary's coming. We're going out of town. And instead, I buried my husband on February 4th. So instead of being away on a trip, I was burying my husband, putting my best friend in the ground. And that's the tragedy.
And as you know, it's still going on today.
Yes, ma'am.
So what do you want people to hear after the story? What's your warning to the people listening that still think it's a good idea to go into hospital?
Avoid hospitals. I would highly recommend preventative measures so that you don't end up at the hospital. Be educated into what they're trying to treat you with, and be willing to refuse it if you do go that far. But basically, my thing is stay away from the hospital. You can't trust them, and they're being compensated. They made a lot of money off of my husband. And another thing that I left out was the fact that when the doctor called me, I went back and looked at my phone, and it was at 4:18 is when he called and told me that Kenny was very sick. Well, when I got the death certificate, the time of death was 3:59. He was already dead. He was not very sick. He was very dead. And he didn't tell me that. Worried that I might have an accident driving there, even though I told him I had a driver. But he knew when he called me, my husband was already dead. So don't trust hospitals. Don't trust your doctors. Sadly, we can't do that anymore.
So you've got his medical records?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you been through them? Are you shocked by what they gave him?
Yes. I learned in looking at the medical records, he was restrained. They made sure when I was there he was not restrained. One day when I was there to visit, they had me wait. They were turning him, and I heard her say, "Oh man, he was really bucking and moving around." Well, then I later find out, in looking at the records and then looking into that, he was trying to come off the vent. He was trying to get out of it. And but I didn't know they were restraining him at the time. I also discovered in his medical records that they gave him 2 of the execution drugs, and that they ended up totally paralyzing him to keep him from moving.
Execution drugs, what do you mean by that?
Midazolam is one of them. They use a cocktail of 3 drugs to execute prisoners. And my husband was given 2 of those 3 drugs that they execute prisoners with. And I know the one for sure was to paralyze him. And the doctor had even stated that to me one time, that they paralyzed him. And so that way he couldn't fight it. They just incapacitated him even more while he was in a coma. So yeah, I discovered some things. And then what happened the day that he died, I read that in the records.
So you believe your husband was killed?
I do believe my husband was killed. He should have been sent home the same way I was, with the same medication to recover. And my husband's he was a very quiet person. I was very much an advocate for him with his health, and was always right there with him. And yeah, I believe he was manipulated, and they took advantage of his having low oxygen levels and just fighting a flu, having fever and chills like we've all had with a flu, and they took advantage of that, and they lied to him.
Is there anything else you want to add to the story?
No, I think that's, I think I've covered,
You have. We're going to put a picture of him, Kenny, on the bus.
Okay.
Give him a number.
I appreciate that. Thank you for memorializing him.